Patrick Christie's here at Westmonster. I'm joined today by John Redwood. Thank you very much for joining us today, John. And we're here to talk about Theresa May's big Brexit speech and then a little bit about the German elections as well. So what do you make of Theresa May's talk in Florence, and what do you think about it?
Prime Minister made a very generous set of proposals to our European partners to try and move the talks on, and her main aim is very sensible, that they are refusing to talk about trade and our future relationship. That's really the only thing that matters, because we are leaving, whatever they think about it. We will be leaving, and we will stop paying the money, and we will regain control of our own laws and borders. And the crucial thing is to talk about trade and the future arrangements. They think they can get a lot of money out of us by not talking trade. It's very important that we don't give them a load of money to talk about trade, and I think the Prime Minister very carefully positioned herself to say we're friendly, we're positive, we want to have a wide-ranging and fair future arrangement, but you've got to talk about everything, and it's crunch time for the EU.
What do you make about this notion of a two-year transition deal? I mean, should we be hurrying up and leaving? What do you think?
Well, I'm in favour of getting out as quickly as possible, and I think we've still got 18 months left under the treaty arrangements. We will be leaving March 29th, 2019. I'd like to see government officials accelerate their work on making sure that everything works smoothly on March 30th, 2019. I think an awful lot can be sorted out by then, with or without the agreement of the EU. We can have a border system and a migration system and a lawmaking system in Britain up and functioning by March 2019, with or without a future agreement. And I think if we do more work on that, it makes a future agreement that much more likely, because the rest of the EU will see we're serious, they will see that we're perfectly capable of being an independent country like many others without an agreement, and they will actually then want an agreement much more, because it's their trade at risk, it's the tariffs that will be going on to their exports to us that they will regret. So that is, I think, what the government's got to do. But I'm perfectly relaxed about the Prime Minister being warm-hearted and positive with our European partners. The EU officials have been very disobliging. I think that reflects badly on them, and I think to love bomb them and to say we're very positive about the future, we're going to be a better partner and friend when you no longer control our budgets and control our laws, is the right thing to say.
Do you think this transition period is kind of being exacerbated by maybe links to the city, or why? Because I mean, most people I've spoken to seem to think it is doable, that Britain doesn't necessarily need this transitional period, and we're not going to walk off a cliff, as people have said. And why is there this notion that we are?
Well, I have no idea. I can't see a cliff we're going to walk off, as long as the government proceeds relatively rapidly on customs and migration and the other things that we can do unilaterally if they don't agree something more sensible with us. And I think the Prime Minister is very careful not to use the word transition. And the Prime Minister says we may need an implementation period.
Yes.
And she didn't say it would definitely be 2 years. And of course you don't know whether you need an implementation period or how long it's got to be until you know what you're implementing. So it's not a substitute for negotiating a future agreement. It's a tag on. She's saying if we get a very comprehensive future agreement, it might be a bit complicated. There may be things that then need to be worked out after you've signed the agreement, and so there may need to be an implementation period. I don't think you need it if there's no deal. And that's why it's terribly important that the British government is ready for no deal, strengthens our bargaining hand, means everything works without having to have the consent of the EU, but it'd be much better if they respond warmly and positively to her very warm and positive suggestions, so that you have a very wide-ranging agreement as well.
There was talk of some continual payments, I suppose, for the transitional period or implementation period. I mean, how much would you pay for a trade deal then, really? Is that what
I would pay nothing for a trade deal, and I think it's against international trade rules to pay for a trade deal. When you negotiate trade deals with other countries, you don't have an argument about how much you pay. It's mutually advantageous to have the trade deal. This one is particularly advantageous to them because they will be much more hit by tariffs under the World Trade Standards than we would be, given how skewed the trade is. And so, no, of course you don't pay for a trade deal. And again, I think the Prime Minister has perhaps been a little misquoted, or some of the commentaries have been exaggerated, because she didn't say we're going to pay 2 years traditional contributions because we're staying fully in the thing. She says it's an implementation period, and she says we'll pay any legal dues, any things that we have to do, and that's a matter for discussion in the context of the future agreement.
There was a little add-on perhaps that seemed to maintain the free movement of people into Britain potentially for a couple of years after we officially left the EU. Where do you stand on that? Because I think for a lot of Brexit voters that was quite a big issue really in terms of voting leave. What do you think about maintaining it?
Well, I'd rather we had our own system up and running by March 2019, but I don't prejudge anything. If she thinks that's part of a negotiation which we need to have, let's see how far you get with the negotiation. But this is where the EU rule works very well for the UK. Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and I'm strongly behind her central proposition, no deal is better than a bad deal. And so if there isn't a great deal on offer, then of course we want to sort the borders out from day one.
Now, with regard to the German election, obviously the AfD made massive gains and Merkel's party went the other way. So you tweeted saying that the German election results strengthened Britain's negotiating position. Can you just expand on that a bit for us?
I think it does, because I think Merkel was a colossally powerful figure in the 2013-17 German Parliament and therefore in the European Union. And an awful lot of her supporters around Europe had just assumed she was going to walk into a fourth period in office and that the opposition wouldn't amount to much. Instead, she's lost a quarter of all her seats and a quarter of all her votes, and will now have a very active opposition well to the right of her on issues like migration and European integration, which she's never had before because they had no presence in the German Parliament. And I hold no voice for the AfD.
Yes, of course.
That's German politics. But as a commentator, you have to recognise German politics is going to be very different. She is going to be harried and put under pressure. The only way she can stay in office is if she can do the splits and find a policy that suits the left-wing Greens and the right-wing Free Democrats. And that's going to be demanding in itself. But then to have the AfD harrying her in another direction again, with a lot of her voters having gone to the AfD, means that she's going to be very preoccupied at home, very weak at home. Each vote might be a problem if she stays in office. And there's always the issue that at any point she could be voted out of office, because the sad truth for her is she only has a quarter of the votes in her parliament. Unlike Theresa May, who has practically a majority in her parliament, even without the single coalition partner. So it's a very different position.
And does the weakening of Angela Merkel and therefore the weakening of maybe centralisation of German power, does that weaken the EU? Does it mean that maybe there are more likely for countries to break away a bit like Britain's done, or what's your take on it?
I don't think any other country's going to break away. I mean, most of the other countries are net recipients of money. We're in a very different position. We're second biggest paymaster, and a lot of us feel we can spend the money better for ourselves. So I think most of the smaller countries who are not very happy will stay in and grumble. But I think it will affect the way Merkel looks at the European problem. And I think if she'd won a more satisfactory victory, she'd have been more positive and helpful, and she would have wanted to send a bit more money to the poor parts of the zone, and she'd wanted to have accommodated them. I think now she won't be able to accommodate them at all, because she'll have the AfD harrying her, saying it's not in Germany's interest to pay more money in, to allow more relaxation of the money supply, or whatever it is that the other countries need and want.
Just lastly, we've seen a bit of a rise of more of a right-wing, more, I suppose, nationalist approach across Europe, in certain pockets of Europe. What's your take on that? Do you think that's maybe the way the European politics go now? Will the EU have to adapt to that, do you think?
I think there's a stronger nationalist trend, but it's not always right-wing. In Greece, it was Theresa, which was very left-wing, and the main challengers in Spain are left to centre. Podemos and Ciudadanos are more left than right. And of course, within Germany, Die Linke has emerged to challenge the Labour lookalike party, the SPD, on the left, as well as the AfD emerging on the right. So the general story is that the traditional Conservative and Labour lookalike parties on the continent, which did alternate in government as they have done in Britain throughout the second half of the 20th century, are now being progressively killed off or very badly damaged. And voters are going both to the right and to the left, and to new parties, even to the centre, if you regard Macron as being in the centre, where they more or less destroyed the traditional Labour Party, Socialist Party in France in the most recent election. So it's a very bad time for the two major parties on the continent. And paradoxically, Britain seems to have declared Brexit already in this respect, because we suddenly had an election a few weeks ago where the two main parties in Britain got 83% of the vote between them. In Germany, the two main parties got 53% of the vote. And in some of the southern countries now, the two main parties get under 40% of the vote between them, because the people are so angry. And what are they angry about? They're angry about the bad economic policy followed in the Eurozone by the austerity, by the endless budget cuts, by by the lack of growth until the last year or so, when there's been a little bit of recovery coming in. And it is smashing up traditional politics on the continent.
John Redwood, thank you very much.